Justice Minister Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune has renewed his trust in Prime Minister Nadi al-Arbawi and entrusted him to lead the new government. And Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ammar Ben Jama, has called on the Security Council to enforce its resolutions on the Middle East if it wants to restore its legitimacy and credibility. G20 leaders affirmed their support for ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon and hailed all the constructive initiatives aimed at ending the genocide war waged by the Israeli occupation. Those were the major developments. Now, the Full News edition. Good afternoon. The President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, received yesterday the U.S. Under-Secretary of State for Civilian Security, Democracy and Human Rights, Iswat Zia, and the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. You still listen to Radio Algeria International. The President also received the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, Barbara Leaf. The meeting was attended by the Director of the Office of the President of the Republic, Boualem Boualem, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Committee Abroad, African Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, the Advisor to the President of the Republic in charge of NGOs and Human Rights, Hamid Lounaoussi, and the Algerian Ambassador to Washington, Sabri Boukadoum. Earlier, the Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Committee Abroad, and African Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, received the American Under-Secretary of State for Civil Security, Democracy and Human Rights, Iswat Zia, and the American Under-Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, Ms. Barbara Leaf. The meeting was an opportunity to discuss several issues relating to the strengthening of Algerian-American relations, as well as a series of international and regional issues on the agenda of the UN Security Council, in particular the developments in the situation in the Gaza Strip in the context of negotiations underway for the adoption of a resolution in the implementation of a ceasefire, the question of the Western Sahara, and the creation of a mission to maintain peace and security in Haiti, and the problem of migration in the Sahel-Saharan region. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and also the President of the Republic's Supreme Chief of Armed Forces and Defense Minister, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has renewed his trust in Prime Minister Nadi al-Arbawi and entrusted him with leading the new government. The new government is marked by the appointment of Army Chief of Staff, Army General Said Shangriha, as Minister Delegate to the National Defense, and by the entry of new government members. Among these, Mr. Lotfi Boujama is appointed Justice Minister in replacement of Mr. Abdurrashid Tabbi, Mohammed Saghir Saadouni as Education Minister, and Mr. Zohir Balalou as Minister of Culture and Arts. He replaces Ms. Soraya Moulouji, who was appointed Minister in charge of National Solidarity, Family and Women Condition. The former Minister of Solidarity, Kautar Kriko, for her part, has been appointed Minister in charge of Relations with Parliament. The new government is marked by the appointment of a new Communication Minister, Mohamed Mizian, and by the entry of 4 state secretaries in charge, notably of Mines, Renewable Energies, the National Community Abroad, and African Affairs. Following the appointment of National Community Abroad and African Affairs Secretary Ms. Selma Bakhta and the National Community Abroad Secretary Mr. Sofiane Shayib, the Foreign Affairs Minister Ahmed Attaf stressed the importance given by the President of the Republic to these 2 portfolios.
The decision reiterates the importance and priority given by the President of the Republic to the African affairs and the national communities abroad, which represent 2 crucial pillars on which Algeria's foreign policy is based.
Earlier, the new Communication Minister Mohamed Mizian said he will not differentiate between different kinds of media, whether national, private or independent.
My first mission will be to make a step forward for all national media with all their diversity. We will not differentiate between national and private media, nor between independent and partisan media. For us, the national media honor Algeria by their high echo in favor of truth and oppressed peoples.
That was the new Communication Minister Mohamed Mizian. The President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, has announced the organization of a national competition for startups to honor the achievements made by young people in the new Algeria. This came in a speech made on the occasion of the official kickoff of the Global Entrepreneurship Week in Algeria, read on his behalf by the former Minister of Knowledge Economy, Startups and Micro Enterprises, Yassine Walid. The President of the Republic called on young people to keep seizing opportunities offered by the country by overcoming difficulties through perseverance and determination. He said Algeria intends to establish itself as an African hub in terms of technology and innovation thanks to the dynamics of startups. The President of the Republic said he was convinced that achieving the expected economic growth requires the state's trust in its young people and in their abilities to be actors of change and stakeholders in national development. You also listen to Radio Algeria International, and the representative of Algeria at the United Nations, Mr. Ammar Beljamaa, called on the UN Security Council to take decisive measures with regard to the Palestinian cause and the situation in Gaza and Lebanon. Majid Mila has the details.
Algeria's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ammar Beljamaa, has called on the Security Council to enforce its resolutions on the Middle East if it wants to restore its legitimacy and credibility. During a Security Council meeting on the situation in the Middle East, Mr. Beljamaa called on the United Nations body to implement its decisions, particularly concerning the situation in occupied Palestine and Lebanon, which are subjected to a savage Israeli aggression. He said while the Security Council has failed to take decisive action, tens of thousands of lives have been lost. The diplomat indicated in this regard that the priority for the Security Council is to put an end to the tragedy and the ongoing massacre by imposing an immediate, permanent and unconditional ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and Lebanon, in addition to addressing the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
The Council must enforce top priority is to halt the ongoing tragedy, to halt the ongoing massacre by imposing an immediate, permanent and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon. Also, it is vital to effectively address the catastrophic humanitarian situation as past effort have fallen short. Yes, the humanitarian operations are currently hindered by the lack of political will on the part of the Israeli occupier, which continue to weaponize starvation, as documented in UN reports. And we call on all Council members to adopt the draft resolution submitted by the elected member of this Council without delay to achieve our common goal of an immediate ceasefire.
The Algerian representative to the United Nations also called on the Security Council to facilitate Palestine's adhesion to the United Nations as a fully fledged member.
Security Council must safeguard the agreed parameters for resolving the Palestinian question by ensuring Palestine's full membership in the United Nations, admitting Palestine as a full member state to the UN, reinforce international law.
Ammar Beljamaa ended his statement by highlighting that the Security Council must act to restore hope in peace and uphold the principles of justice and international law.
And as the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights, Francesca Albanese, stated that all inquiries confirm that a genocide is taking place in Gaza, the Israeli occupation pursued its acts of aggression on the territory, killing at least 50 Palestinians for the past 24 hours. The news agency Wafa stressed that 110 people were wounded in the Israeli attacks that hit the northern town of Beit Lahia and Rafah in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Addressing the Spanish Parliament, the UN Special Rapporteur said that she spent the past year documenting the genocide perpetrated by the Israeli occupation in Gaza and the intense destruction operations targeting the Palestinian territory.
There is no plan B within the UN agency, within the UN family, because there is no other agency geared to provide the same activities. And in reality, UNRWA is the response of the international community to the plight of the Palestinian refugees through the mandate provided by the GA resolution.
That was the head of the UN Relief Agency, UNRWA, Filippi Lazzarini. The Palestinians or the participants are rallying in solidarity with the Palestinian people organized in Algiers following the genocide perpetrated by the Israeli occupation against them, have stressed the need to unite the Palestinian ranks in order to abort the Israeli occupation's project, praising Algeria's historic positions, which enable the proclamation of the Palestinian state from Algiers. During a rally organized at the Embassy of the State of Palestine in Algeria to mark the 20th anniversary of the death of Palestinian President Yasser Arafat and the 36th anniversary of the proclamation of the State of Palestine, participants praised the qualities of the late Palestinian president and his struggle on behalf of the Palestinian people and their legitimate cause. The Palestinian ambassador to Algeria, Faiz Abu Aita, described the double anniversary as a Palestinian-Algerian occasion, declaring, "We would not have experienced these historic moments without the Algerian effort." He recalled that Algeria had opened its doors to the Palestinian National Council in 1988 when many other countries had closed them, and contributed to the unification of the Palestinian factions.
Algeria opened its doors to host the Palestinian National Council to be held here in Algeria at a time when many other doors had been closed. Algeria, which spared no effort to unify all Palestinian factions to reach a historic moment highlighted by Yasser Arafat, who from the Palais des Nations here in Algiers declared the independence of the State of Palestine in 1988.
That was the Palestinian ambassador to Algiers, Faiz Abu Aita. And now Algeria has called on the international community to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Sudan, demanding a public and firm condemnation of foreign interference in the country, while calling on Sudanese parties to the conflict to accept a ceasefire without further delay. Miriam Barshi has the details.
In his statement made following the failure of the UN Security Council to adopt a draft resolution calling for an end to hostilities in Sudan, the Algerian representative to the UN called on all states to fully comply with the sanctions set and the arms embargo related to the conflict in Sudan. The representative of Algeria also stressed the need to reopen border crossings, with Sudan welcoming the flexibility recently shown by the Sudanese government on this specific issue. He also called for facilitating humanitarian operations for the South Kordofan region in the south of the country, and expressed hope that more humanitarian aid would reach civilian populations in need. He described the situation in Sudan as delicate, adding that Algeria remained convinced that the Security Council must play its role to find adequate solutions to protect civilians in Sudan.
That the Security Council must fulfill its part in providing the right responses to protect civilians in Sudan within the provision of international humanitarian law and international law. This response, however, needs to remain guided by the full respect of Sudan's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Very clearly, we are not in ease with the propension to place the internationally recognized government of Sudan and the Sudanese Rapid Force.
Meanwhile, Mr. Benjamin said attempts to put the internationally recognized government of Sudan and the Rapid Support Paramilitary Forces RSF on an equal footing is not adequate. He said the conflict in Sudan requires a gradual approach, taking into account the real conditions on the ground, as described by the UN Secretary General, and taking into consideration the will expressed by the Sudanese government. Furthermore, the diplomat affirmed that Algeria will continue to support the efforts made by the Secretary General and his personal envoy in Sudan to bring all Sudanese parties to the negotiating table, urging them to accept a ceasefire without further delay. Let's note that the draft resolution tabled by the United Kingdom and Sierra Leone called, among other things, for respecting the commitments made in 2023 to protect civilians and to allow a rapid, safe and unhindered access to humanitarian aid.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. The G20 leaders affirmed their support for ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon and hailed all the constructive initiatives aimed at ending the genocidal war being waged by the Israeli occupying forces. In a joint statement following the meeting in Rio de Janeiro, the heads of state and government expressed concern at the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the besieged Palestinian enclave, affirming their unanimous support for ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon. And to Western Sahara now, the Polisario Front has condemned the attempts by some major powers to oppose peaceful settlements and to not abide by international law. In a communique issued at the end of a meeting of the Polisario Front's permanent secretariat presided over by Secretary General Sahrawi President Brahim Ghali blamed some permanent members of the UN Security Council for failing to support just solutions. You're listening to Radio Algeria International, and time now for our health magazine compiled and presented by Mohammed Khatir.